Prairie Yard and Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yakel Julien, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org. Diamond Willow Advanced Care Assisted Living, providing custom homes with smaller settings designed especially for high care needs.
When I was in high school, the school superintendent was our math teacher. He was really strict, but he was also a very good teacher, and we really learned our math. Well, this past year I went to a gardening seminar where we learned that 1 + 1 = 1. I'm Mary Holm, host of Prairie Yard and Garden, and come and see what that is all about. Years ago, our neighbor across the street had a tree that seemed to be 3 trees. It was one apple tree, but it would get 3 different kinds of apples on it. One kind was smaller, like a crab apple, and the other 2 were larger, but different colors. My husband said that tree had been grafted, and that just fascinated me. Last year, I met David Vaske, who loves to do tree grafting, and he agreed to come show me how 1 + 1 = 1. Welcome, David.
Good morning, Mary.
Tell us a little about yourself. What is your background and your education?
Well, my background is a little varied, but my education is actually in science. So my original bachelor's degree from NDSU is in biochemistry. And then I went on to get a PhD also in biochemistry from NDSU. From there, my career really went into the genetics field. So I have done animal genetics, plant genetics, as well as human genetics. However, that being the case, my interest and hobby has really always been in gardening. And one of my longtime interests and passions has been apples. Okay. And so with life's wanderings, I am now on the start of my 5th orchard, I think. And I think this is the one that I'll actually finally get a lot of apples out of.
How did you end up at the Miltona greenhouse?
Yeah. So yeah, again, life's wanderings, you never know where it will take you. With the number of areas we've lived in the Midwest, I would have never thought we would end up in rural Parker's Prairie. But I think our roots are planted pretty deep there now. But it was an opportunity that came along, and it was a little bit obviously of a career change. And so it was that big step from turning a hobby interest into a business and the challenges that go along with it.
Explain, what is grafting?
So grafting is really the union of 2 pieces of growth. The limitation is there has to be some relatedness between those. So there has to be compatibility between what you're putting on, what's called your rootstock, and your signwood, which is the top piece of wood that you're working on. And so apples are really compatible. So you can take any apple and pretty much graft it to any other apple. Pears, very similar. Pear can go on to pear, and also pear can go on to a plant that's very similar called quince.
Why do people do grafting?
So the number one reason is really for propagation. And so if we think of trees, the comment is, first of all, you always know mom. And so this here is actually a Pink Lady apple purchased at the grocery store. And uniquely important for the discussion is this was out of the state of Washington. And so if you come here, if you want a Pink Lady, you have to graft from a Pink Lady apple tree. And so actually this one surprisingly has just a few seeds. But if you think of the seeds in this apple, the best way to think of that is these are, so Pink Lady is mom, these seeds are her children. And so she obviously has, you know, a full-grown tree could have hundreds to thousands of apples. She has a lot of children every year. And so the important point I'd commented that this is from Washington. If you're in Washington State, they grow apples differently. And so they have acres upon acres of really monoculture. And since apples need a different variety to pollinate them, and so what they put in Washington or plant in Washington is a lot of flowering crabs, because flowering crabs reliably bloom every year, and they have what's called a very viable pollen. And so knowing that this came from Washington, we know what mom looks like. She's a Pink Lady apple. Dad is likely a small, inedible apple. And so if you were to plant this seed, you would have to, from a Washington apple, you would have to plant thousands upon thousands upon thousands to actually get an apple that would at least match the original initial characteristics of mom.
So you basically need to graft in order to get the true genetics of what you want to have.
Exactly. So if you want a Honeycrisp, every Honeycrisp apple tree in the world is identical to the original tree that was probably planted out in Chanhassen or Chaska, Minnesota at the U of M Arboretum out there.
Okay.
So every Honeycrisp is the same. Every Pink Lady apple tree in the world is the same. And that's because, again, you can't plant the seeds. The seeds are like our kids. They will have characteristics of both parents. And in the case of our family, it's luckily most of my kids picked up a lot of mom's traits. So.
When is the best time to graft?
Your best time, or the most common time to graft, at least for the types of grafts that we're going to largely do today, is spring, when stuff is still dormant.
So then what kind of supplies do you need in order to do grafting?
So you need obviously you need a source of rootstock, and those are available commercially. Your choice of rootstock is two main factors: size and cold hardiness. And so one of the hardiest rootstocks is called Anktova, and that's also a lot of times referred to as a seedling rootstock. That will give you a full-size tree. And full-size trees can be problematic. They can be very delayed to fruiting, and obviously they become very large. And so they can give you a lot of apples, more apples than most people would need. But it's hardy. So when you're up in zone 3, that's typically the type of rootstock that's available. More common, and another very nice one for semi-dwarf, and it's what we'll be using here to demonstrate with shortly, EMLA 7 or M7. Again, it's considered a semi-dwarfing rootstock. It'll give us a tree about anywhere from 10 to 15 feet tall at full maturity, and it's what they refer to as precocity. It's rapid to start bearing fruit. And so with these M7, when we're done, even though this is just a twig with not much, you could, with proper care, force this into its first apple in 3 years. So, but you have to treat it like you want that first apple in 3 years. Your signwood there are, again, commercial sources. So the one that I've used a lot is Maple Valley Orchards. They're actually out of Door County, Wisconsin. You can find them on the web. Otherwise, anyone that has an apple tree that you want. So your local orchards can be a good source. Again, I got my Zestar from a neighbor. He has 3 or 4 trees that were planted. They're really right now in the prime of their life. And but what you want, if you're harvesting yourself, what you want is what's called a water sprout. And those are the branches that grow up vigorously on your trees. And typically after a pruning cut the following year, you'll get that. And so this is actually a 1-year water sprout that was harvested yesterday.
So water sprout is different than the shoots that come up from the base of the tree.
Yep. The shoots from the base of the tree, you want to be careful if you're going to use those. And so when you're looking at a tree, again, realizing that almost, all trees are grafted, except for the few exceptions of a deer apple found out in a fence line. So when you're looking at a tree, be it in a pot or in the ground, you can see what's called the graft union. And it's just that swelling. That's actually where that tree was, joined from the signwood to the rootstock. And so if you have shoots that are coming below that, you would not be very happy with the result if you use that for to graft as your scion, because it'd be like eating cardboard, is what the typical rootstock apple is like.
Okay.
But if you have shoots coming anywhere from above that graft union, then that's, would be appropriate.
I have a question. Deer are wreaking havoc in my yard. What can I do to stop them from eating my plants?
At the Arboretum, we've been dealing with deer for over 60 years, and they've been wreaking havoc here too. What we do is try to rely on physical barricades because that is the most effective. If you can put up a big old 7 or 8 foot tall fence, great. They can't get in. They can't jump that high. That's not super practical for most people, and it's not very practical for us either. We will use those in select areas that we know deer can decimate, so we try to pick and choose our battles. For other areas, especially when we have young trees, I really recommend putting tree guards on young trees, especially fruit trees. Not only will deer chew on the bark, but other critters like voles and sometimes even squirrels will damage the bark, just sharpening their teeth. Deer can also rub their antlers against it. So really, one thing that I like about this tree guard is it's a wrap, which means it's not a set tube. It can expand as the tree grows. So you can put it on early on in the tree's life and then just keep checking it every couple of years to see if you need to add to it. Otherwise, what you can do for other shrubs, like evergreens especially that get hit during the winter when there's not much else for deer to eat, you can buy some pretty thin gauge netting, and it's sold pretty inexpensively at hardware stores and garden centers. Cut it down to the size that you need and just wrap it around your evergreen if it's small enough. Really, for deer, they can't eat any higher than their head goes, than their mouth goes. So about 4.5 feet tall is about as much as they're gonna damage, and they'll chew it all the way down to the ground. So if you've got trees and shrubs that you wanna protect, just try and protect that bottom 4 or 5 feet with this kind of netting. You can secure it with cable ties or twist ties, and then take it down in the spring when you think that it's going to be okay. For chemical controls, there are options. There are repellents that you can use to make the plant taste gross to the deer. What you want to make sure though is that it's got something in it that smells. Deer are more affected by smell than by taste. They might still try and taste it a little bit, but if you've got both the smell and taste component in your spray, you're gonna do great with it. There are some options that are sold at garden centers that are labeled for deer repellent, but honestly, you can make some of those at home with household products that you probably already have. Eggs. Eggs, as soon as they start to spoil, and that sulfur smell is what's really gonna make the deer run away. They don't like it. Really, nobody would. But if you want to search the web for some recipes, just make sure it's got an egg base in it, maybe even some hot peppers, some garlic, some cloves, anything that really has a pungent smell. And you want to coat the leaves to make sure that all leaf areas are covered. As soon as it rains heavily, you'll need to reapply. And as soon as the plant grows significantly, if it puts on a few more inches of growth or puts out a new flush of leaves, you'll want to reapply then too. As long as you can keep that on there, the deer won't bug your plants.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
Dave, what are the most common kinds of grafts?
Okay, there are actually two of the most common grafts. Actually, the most common graft used commercially is called a T-graft or a bud graft. And so if we look at this tree here, ignore the damage, sort of the way that scion or that is growing out of here, this was actually T-budded or T-grafted in the summer. Actually, it's the easiest graft to do. Real easy. The downfall of it is you lose a growing season because it's this summer, you're going to insert a bud into that rootstock, and you'll know at the end of the growing year if that bud has lived. And then next spring, if it's lived, you're going to clip the rest of your rootstock off, and that bud will grow from there.
The rootstock or the scion?
Well, it's all going to, since all you have in this, you're going to, if we take a piece of rootstock again as the example, so somewhere in here, we're going to insert a bud of the variety. And so this tree is going to be, it's during the growing season. And if this bud takes, we'll be able to take, and so next spring, we will have to cut the top of this rootstock or top of this tree off to force then growth from that bud that we inserted. And that, so definitely all of your, most of your commercial apples are in fact T-budded. Your roses are all T-budded. But when you're at a nursery, when you're looking at a tree, and you sort of see that at the base, that offset, that's just clue number one that plant was T-budded. The other common one is a tongue and whip graft. And so I've in interest of time, have just cut these off. And you need a sharp knife to do this. Always make sure you have protection. And I have the graft or the scars to show what happens when you don't. But anyway, we have come here, we've taken that, and we've got pretty much same angle cut on both our rootstock and our scionwood, and there's a ring there, and we've made actually what's called our tongue on the outer side of that ring, just that when we start to slide these together, they actually will match up. And the ideal is, this one we were lucky we had a lot of choices. We actually have the identical size between our rootstock and our scion. There's almost perfect matchup, and if you do it right, there is a lot of hold there. You're still going to wrap this up and care for it to seal it up, but this one, again, perfect. And then obviously the last thing, to grow this tree, I only need one bud. And so is Robert Tomesh, one of the instructors that I would attend when we were in Wisconsin. He was at the time, I believe he's retired, but now he was with the UW Extension. Everything above here is a mouth to feed. And you only really need one mouth to feed, but in case of something happens, you leave it, you cut it to just down to 2 buds on your scionwood.
Okay. So then, where do we go from here? I mean, how do you keep it together?
So we're going to, from there, there's a number of things you can use. I prefer a product called rubberized electrical tape, sometimes called splicing tape. And it's one that's a primary one I use. And I like it because it will weather and rot off on its own. And so, you only really need that to hold together, for about a month. But it stretches and wraps and you seal it. To hold that together, you've got your cambium matching up, and again, you now have that wound sealed from the weather, and so now it's going to, take a little bit to heal over. So this tree here, would wrap the bottom in some newspaper, dampen it, stick the whole thing in a plastic bag to keep it damp, and put it in a cool place for a couple weeks. Now after a couple of weeks, you can actually put it out in a pot. You can plant it in its site. But the best thing to do with this is to plant it and treat it like you would a tomato. And so if you're planting a tomato in your garden, you typically have a well worked up garden. You're going to put your tomato in, you're going to fertilize it with some sort. It may be compost, might be fertilizer, just depending what you have or what you use. And you're going to mulch it to help control weeds. If you do that same thing with this apple, either of these buds have the ability to grow 6 feet this year. It's a little bit better to get it in the ground because you typically will have less water stress than if you plant it in a pot, and you get a little bit more fertility. But you can get 6 feet of growth out of this tree. And then next spring, you would now have a long whip, 6 feet. You would top that off to start to form the branching, and you would also dig it out of your garden and move it to the site that you actually want that tree. Okay. Simply, and again, where you plant it. The thing is, apples do not compete well with grass for water and nutrients, and so you need to do something with the grass that's under that tree. And so the best is to lay down a couple sheets of cardboard and cover that grass, and then cover that cardboard with 3 to 6 inches of some type of a mulch. A wood-based mulch is best because rodents don't tend to nest or like wood-based mulches as well as they do grass. But if grass is all you have, grass is better than nothing.
They used to say years ago that when you plant the tree, you should put the graft below ground.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So this, again, when we think of it, we've selected this rootstock because of its size characteristics, and we've selected this signwood, in this case a Zestar, because of the quality of its fruit. We know nothing about the true size of a Zestar apple. It might be the prettiest little dwarf apple you ever saw in your life. But the odds are that Zestar on its own roots might grow to be 30 or 40 or even 50 feet tall. We just don't know. And so if we go and we plant this graft union below the ground, we have now basically effectively removed our dwarfing rootstock. We've given that signwood the opportunity to develop its own roots, and it is off to the races in terms of how long, how big that tree is going to be and how long to fruiting. And so that's with fruit. If you're grafting roses, which have different reasons for grafting, you want to be planting that graft below the ground. But it just sort of depends. What am I doing and why?
Okay. So roses, yes. Trees, no.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Roses, yes. Apples or fruit, no.
Okay.
If you had a grafted maple tree, so you can see occasionally the variegated sugar maple or the variegated silver maple. Again, you grafted that onto a rootstock because you needed to propagate that. And so if you plant that below or above ground, it really doesn't matter because that tree will get to be a full-size tree. Okay. But yeah.
Okay. So how do you take care of your newly grafted plant the first winter, getting it through the winter?
Okay. So this year, past year was tough. It's actually, you want to do a couple of things. And again, this one is a great illustration. This was a nursery or tree just out in my nursery. We had a tremendous rabbit problem. This year with the snow, we had tremendous mouse problems. And of the two, surprisingly, give me the rabbit problem. Because I've got a couple things I can do. I can put a bridge graft here to sort of repair this rabbit damage, or the rabbit damage typically tends to be above the snow. Rabbits don't burrow to eat, they eat stuff above the ground. And so even though this tree is greatly damaged, I have intact buds below that damage that one of the options on a younger tree is I can just cut that off.
Okay, and it would take off and start growing from
and
there.
So, if I cut that off, I'm going to probably select that bud for
Okay,
growth.
okay. But when you said do a bridge graft, you could actually take and cut this and then graft
and
top back on.
Yeah, in the interest of time, there are great sources on the internet. Google bridge grafting, you'll find some YouTube. But you're basically, to rescue this tree, I'm going to would do a graft that's going to use any apple, all right? So in this case, I'd be using a Zestar, and I'm going to somehow, I'm going to graft in there, and I'm going to, because I want some force on it, insert up above, where my damage. And so again, what that will do is so this tree isn't completely girdled, but it's greatly damaged. What a bridge graft will do is basically reconnect the cambium wood from the bottom to the top.
Okay, so you can save the tree.
You can save the tree. Okay. And so, again, this is a young enough tree, and bridge grafts can be messy. I've got intact, viable buds. I'm just going to cut them off, and those will get planted, unfortunately, into my own orchard because they won't be a sellable tree, but it's still salvageable.
Do you go out and actually teach classes?
I have. I've taught the classes sort of through the Master Gardeners clubs in the Alexandria area. So I've had a number of presentations at the Let's Get Growing in Alexandria, and this year I also taught at Perham. The Eastern Ottertail Master Gardeners typically meet, have their Saturday session in mid-March, and then we did Fergus Falls, the Western Ottertail Master Gardeners, at the end of March. And then I've also taught through the continuing ed program in Alexandria.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming out and teaching an old dog some new tricks. I really appreciate that.
It's been my pleasure. I always like to show grafting, so.
Thank you so much.
Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yakel Julien, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org. Diamond Willow Advanced Care Assisted Living, providing custom homes with smaller settings designed especially for high care needs.